There will always be people who attempt to shrink you, not because you are small, but because your presence unsettles the smallness they have accepted within themselves. Toxic people do not always arrive with warning signs. They do not wear labels. They often enter quietly, sometimes smiling, sometimes familiar, sometimes cloaked in charm or authority. Yet their impact is unmistakable. They drain, they belittle, they manipulate, they provoke. They stir confusion where there should be clarity and plant doubt where confidence once stood. And in their presence, many begin the slow, invisible surrender of self-respect. But listen carefully, your dignity is not a fragile object to be handed over at the mercy of another's behavior. Your worth is not negotiable. Respect for yourself is not something granted by the world. It is something declared by the soul and reinforced by the choices you make every day. To respect yourself in front of toxic people requires a particular kind of courage. Not loud courage, not theatrical courage, but steady, grounded courage. The courage to remain anchored when someone attempts to pull you into storms of their making. The courage to stand upright when someone hopes you will bend. The courage to guard your inner peace with the same intensity that others guard their possessions. Self-respect begins with recognition. You must first see toxicity for what it is. Many endure disrespect because they hesitate to name it. They excuse cruelty as personality. They disguise manipulation as concern. They normalize patterns that slowly erode their confidence. But clarity is the first defense of dignity. When words consistently wound, when actions repeatedly undermine, when interactions leave you feeling diminished rather than strengthened, you are not witnessing harmless behavior. You are standing in the presence of something that demands boundaries. And boundaries, though often misunderstood, are among the purest expressions of self-respect. They are not walls built from anger, but lines drawn from wisdom. A boundary says, I know who I am, and I know what I will not accept. Toxic individuals often resist boundaries because boundaries disrupt their control. They may mock them, challenge them, or attempt to cross them repeatedly. Yet every time you reinforce a boundary, you affirm your value. To respect yourself before toxic people, you must master the art of emotional discipline. Toxicity thrives on reaction. It feeds on visible frustration, on raised voices, on impulsive responses. When you react without reflection, you surrender your power. But when you pause, when you choose calm over chaos, you shift the balance entirely. Silence, when chosen deliberately, can be a shield. Composure can be a form of quiet authority. You do not owe every provocation a response. This does not mean you become passive. Self-respect is not silence born from fear. It is restraint born from strength. There is a difference between refusing to engage and being unable to speak. One is power, the other is surrender. You must also learn the sacred skill of detachment. Not indifference, not coldness, but healthy separation from the emotional traps toxic people set. Their words may be sharp, their judgments loud, their opinions relentless. But their voices need not become your inner voice. When you internalize their negativity, you carry burdens that were never yours to bear. Detachment allows you to witness behavior without absorbing its poison. Remember this: not every criticism deserves consideration. Not every opinion merits emotional investment. Not every conflict requires participation. Self-respect in hostile environments also demands a deep connection with your inner truth. Toxic individuals often distort reality. They may question your memory, dismiss your feelings, or twist narratives to their advantage. Over time, this can destabilize even the strongest minds. The antidote is self-trust. You must cultivate a relationship with your own perceptions, your own values, your own instincts. When you trust yourself, manipulation loses its grip. There is immense power in self-validation. Waiting for understanding from those committed to misunderstanding you is a recipe for exhaustion. Respecting yourself means acknowledging your own experiences without requiring external approval. You know what you felt. You know what you endured. You know what is real. Another pillar of self-respect is the refusal to mirror toxic behavior. When faced with hostility, the temptation to retaliate can be overwhelming. Yet becoming a reflection of the very conduct you reject only deepens the damage. Your character is not defined by how others behave toward you, but by how you respond. Grace under pressure is not weakness, it is mastery. And grace, contrary to popular belief, is not submission. It is strength expressed without cruelty. To respect yourself, you must become comfortable with discomfort. Toxic dynamics often persist because individuals fear confrontation, rejection, or isolation. They endure mistreatment to avoid temporary unease. But growth rarely resides within comfort. Sometimes self-respect requires difficult conversations. Sometimes it requires distance. Sometimes it requires walking away from spaces where your spirit is consistently bruised. Departure is not failure. Separation is not defeat. Choosing peace over proximity is an act of profound wisdom. Self-respect also flourishes through self-awareness. Toxic people are skilled at finding insecurities and pressing upon them. The more unaware you are of your vulnerabilities, the more easily they can be exploited. But when you know your triggers, when you understand your emotional patterns, when you recognize your fears, you reduce the leverage others hold over you. Awareness transforms weakness into resilience. Yet respect for yourself is not solely defensive. It is also nurturing. Protecting your dignity means actively investing in your well-being. It means surrounding yourself whenever possible with voices that uplift rather than diminish. It means engaging in practices that strengthen your confidence, your clarity, your sense of identity. Toxic environments lose much of their power when they are not your only environment. Never underestimate the importance of internal reinforcement. How you speak to yourself shapes how firmly you stand before others. A mind saturated with self-criticism struggles to withstand external negativity, but a mind rooted in self-compassion develops remarkable endurance. Speak to yourself with patience. Encourage yourself with sincerity. Treat your inner world with care. To respect yourself before toxic people is also to accept that you cannot change them. Many waste precious energy attempting to reform those who are deeply committed to their patterns. They explain, they justify, they negotiate endlessly. But transformation is a personal decision. You are responsible for your conduct, not for another's evolution. Releasing the burden of changing others frees you to focus on safeguarding yourself. Strength does not always look like confrontation. Sometimes it appears as quiet confidence, sometimes as strategic distance, sometimes as unwavering self-belief. There is a profound dignity in consistency. Toxic individuals often test limits repeatedly, probing for cracks in your resolve. If your boundaries shift with every interaction, confusion replaces clarity. But when your standards remain steady, when your responses remain measured, when your sense of self remains anchored, you establish an unspoken authority. Respect for yourself grows through repeated acts of self-honoring behavior. Do not confuse kindness with compliance. You can be compassionate without being permissive. You can be understanding without tolerating disrespect. You can be gentle without abandoning firmness. True kindness includes kindness toward oneself. Self-respect demands vigilance over your energy. Toxic interactions can be emotionally exhausting, leaving you drained and unsettled. Protecting your energy is not selfish, it is essential. Limit unnecessary exposure. Choose your engagements wisely. Invest your attention where it is reciprocated with decency. It is equally important to release the need for universal approval. Toxic people often weaponize disapproval, using it to pressure conformity or provoke insecurity. But approval is a fleeting currency. If your self-worth depends upon it, you will always be vulnerable. Respecting yourself means grounding your identity in values rather than opinions. Your worth is inherent, not awarded. Understand, too, that self-respect is not arrogance. It is not superiority. It is the quiet recognition of your own humanity, your own value, your own right to be treated with dignity. It coexists beautifully with humility. It does not demand domination. It demands fairness. Resilience grows through perspective. Toxic behavior, though hurtful, often reflects the unresolved struggles of those who exhibit it. This understanding does not excuse mistreatment, but it prevents unnecessary internalization. Their negativity is a mirror of their inner turmoil, not a measure of your worth. Hold firmly to the knowledge of who you are beyond their narratives. You are not defined by their judgments, their projections, their attempts to diminish. You are defined by your choices, your integrity, your perseverance, your capacity for growth. Respecting yourself is a daily practice, not a singular achievement. It is reflected in how you think, how you speak, how you respond, how you protect your peace. It is strengthened each time you refuse to accept less than you deserve. And know this above all, your dignity does not require an audience. Even when unnoticed, even when uncelebrated, every act of self-respect shapes your inner foundation. Stand with quiet confidence. Speak with measured clarity. Walk with unwavering self-belief. Toxic people may attempt to disturb your balance, but they need not determine your posture. They may generate noise, but they need not dictate your voice. They may cast shadows, but they cannot extinguish the light that originates within you. For self-respect, once truly claimed, becomes unshakable. It becomes a steady flame, untouched by passing winds, immune to careless hands, resilient in the face of darkness. Guard that flame, nurture it, stand by it, and wherever you go, let it illuminate the undeniable truth of your worth. The moment you begin trying to prove your worth to those who are committed to misunderstanding you, you unknowingly hand them a power they never truly possessed. It is a subtle shift, almost invisible at first, yet deeply consequential. Your energy, once centered and self-directed, becomes entangled in their judgments, their approval, their ever-changing standards. You begin to measure yourself through their eyes, and in doing so, you step away from the most reliable source of validation you will ever have, your own understanding of who you are. There is a quiet exhaustion that comes from constantly attempting to justify your value. It is not the fatigue of honest effort or meaningful labor, but the draining weight of chasing acceptance from those who have already decided to withhold it. No matter how clearly you explain, how patiently you demonstrate, or how persistently you try to show your sincerity, the outcome rarely changes. This is because the issue was never a lack of evidence, it was a lack of willingness on their part to see it. When you attempt to prove your worth to the unworthy, you step into a game designed for your defeat. The rules are unstable, the expectations unclear, and the finish line forever moving. Each time you believe you have finally said enough or done enough, another demand emerges, another doubt surfaces, another criticism appears. The pursuit becomes endless, not because you lack value, but because the validation you seek is intentionally kept out of reach. Worth, by its nature, is not something that requires relentless demonstration. It is inherent, woven into your existence, shaped by your character, your experiences, your intentions, your growth. Yet the act of trying to prove it suggests uncertainty, as though your value must be negotiated or defended. This is where the true loss of power occurs. Not in the opinions of others, but in the gradual erosion of your own certainty. The unworthy are not defined by status, wealth, or outward appearance. They are defined by their inability or refusal to recognize the dignity of others. They are individuals who derive comfort from diminishing, who feel strengthened by belittling, who mistake criticism for superiority. Their judgments are rarely reflections of truth. They are projections of insecurity, fear, or unresolved conflict. To seek validation from such sources is to build confidence on unstable ground. There is a profound difference between growth-driven self-reflection and approval-driven self-doubt. The first arises from a genuine desire to improve, to learn, to evolve. The second emerges from the need to satisfy external voices that may never be satisfied. One strengthens identity, the other fragments it. When you anchor your self-perception in the reactions of those who neither respect nor understand you, you place your emotional stability in precarious hands. Often, the desire to prove worth is rooted in a deeply human longing, the wish to be seen, acknowledged, understood. This longing is natural, yet it becomes dangerous when directed toward those who consistently respond with dismissal or contempt. The repeated attempt to win over the unwilling can slowly distort self-perception. You begin questioning your adequacy, your competence, even your basic sense of self. Doubt grows not from genuine deficiency, but from relentless exposure to invalidation. Power is not merely dominance or control, it is the capacity to remain anchored in self-knowledge regardless of external turbulence. Each time you feel compelled to defend your value before those who have shown no intention of fairness, you drift away from that anchor. Your emotional state becomes reactive, dependent, unsettled. Their opinions gain influence not because they are accurate, but because you have granted them significance. There is dignity in self-assurance that requires no performance. A quiet confidence that does not rush to justify itself, that does not tremble at skepticism, that does not chase reluctant approval. Such confidence is not arrogance. It is the calm recognition that your value is not contingent upon another's perception. It is the understanding that respect, when genuine, flows naturally and cannot be extracted through persuasion. Trying to prove your worth to the unworthy often leads to a cycle of overexertion. You give more than necessary, explain more than required, tolerate more than reasonable. You stretch your patience, your emotional resilience, your mental clarity. Yet the more you offer, the less it seems to matter. This imbalance is not accidental. Those who thrive on invalidating others rarely respond to increased effort with increased appreciation. Self-respect requires the courage to recognize when validation is being sought from the wrong audience. Not every critic deserves your explanation. Not every doubter merits your defense. Not every voice warrants your attention. Discernment becomes an essential skill, the ability to distinguish between constructive feedback and habitual negativity, between genuine misunderstanding and deliberate dismissal. The act of disengaging from the need to prove your worth is not withdrawal, it is reclamation. It is the decision to redirect energy toward spaces and individuals capable of reciprocity, fairness, and respect. It is the refusal to exhaust yourself in pursuits that yield only frustration and self-doubt. It is the recognition that your time and emotional resources are finite and deserve careful stewardship. There is also a subtle liberation in releasing the burden of persuasion. When you no longer feel obligated to convince others of your value, interactions lose much of their emotional volatility. Criticism no longer destabilizes you as easily. Dismissal no longer carries the same sting. Their inability to see you clearly becomes a reflection of their limitations rather than your inadequacy. True power emerges from internal stability, from a sense of self that remains intact despite disagreement or disapproval, from the understanding that not all judgments carry equal weight, from the wisdom to invest emotional energy selectively rather than indiscriminately. The unworthy lose their influence when their perceptions lose their authority. The world is vast, filled with individuals capable of recognizing and appreciating your qualities without requiring endless justification. To remain fixated on convincing those determined not to see you is to overlook countless opportunities for genuine connection and mutual respect. Energy misdirected toward resistance is energy unavailable for growth, creativity, and fulfillment. You are not obligated to perform your worth for skeptical audiences. You are not required to argue your value into existence. You are not diminished by another's refusal to acknowledge you. Value does not evaporate in the presence of disbelief. It remains steady, independent, unaffected by selective recognition. When you cease striving to prove your worth to the unworthy, you do not lose anything of substance. You shed only the unnecessary weight of external validation. You reclaim clarity, emotional equilibrium, and the quiet strength of self-definition. You stand not in opposition to their judgments, but beyond their reach. Your value is not a fragile possession that rises and falls with the opinions of others. It does not swell when praised nor shrink when ignored. Yet many people live as though their worth is measured by recognition, as though being unseen is the same as being insignificant. This belief quietly infiltrates the mind, shaping reactions, influencing choices, and eroding confidence. When someone fails to acknowledge your strengths, your kindness, your abilities, it is easy to internalize their blindness as a verdict. But perception is not truth, and another person's inability to see clearly does not redefine what you are. There is a dangerous habit in human nature, the tendency to equate visibility with value. We are conditioned to celebrate applause, validation, and approval. From childhood, approval often becomes intertwined with identity. Praise feels like confirmation. Criticism feels like subtraction. Over time, many begin outsourcing their sense of worth to external observers, allowing acceptance to dictate confidence. In such a system, being overlooked becomes painful not because value has changed, but because belief has. Yet worth is inherent. It is not granted by attention. It is not awarded by agreement. It is not created by acknowledgement. It exists independently, rooted in your character, your experiences, your perspective, your humanity. When someone refuses or fails to see your value, they reveal the limits of their perception, not the limits of your significance. Their view, no matter how loud or persistent, remains only a view. Consider how often misunderstanding shapes human interactions. People interpret through the lens of their own experiences, biases, fears, and insecurities. What they notice, what they dismiss, what they appreciate, and what they overlook are filtered through internal narratives you cannot control. Expecting universal recognition is therefore unrealistic. Not everyone possesses the clarity, maturity, or openness required to perceive others fully. Some are distracted by their own struggles. Some are constrained by envy. Some are simply unwilling to look beyond superficial judgments. When you tie your self-worth to such unstable foundations, you surrender emotional stability to forces beyond your influence. Approval fluctuates. Opinions shift. Recognition is inconsistent. One day admired, another day ignored. A person anchored solely in external validation experiences constant uncertainty. Confidence becomes conditional. Self-perception becomes reactive. Inner peace becomes elusive. There is profound strength in understanding that your value remains constant regardless of who acknowledges it. This understanding does not eliminate disappointment, but it prevents distortion. Rejection, dismissal, or indifference no longer carry the same destructive weight. They may sting, but they do not define. They may unsettle, but they do not dismantle. Much suffering arises from the mistaken assumption that being unseen means being unworthy. This assumption can infiltrate workplaces, relationships, social environments, even families. Efforts go unnoticed, contributions minimized, qualities undervalued. The human impulse is often to compensate, to try harder, speak louder, prove more, seek reassurance. While growth and self-improvement are admirable pursuits, desperation for recognition can become an exhausting cycle. No amount of effort guarantees perception from those unwilling or unable to offer it. It is also important to recognize that others' perceptions are influenced by factors unrelated to you. Insecurity, comparison, prejudice, competition, and unresolved emotions shape judgment. A person threatened by competence may minimize it. A person uncomfortable with confidence may criticize it. A person clouded by envy may refuse acknowledgement entirely. Their reactions are reflections of their internal state, not objective evaluations of your worth. True self-respect requires separating identity from perception. It requires grounding confidence in self-awareness rather than external response. This does not imply isolation from feedback or indifference to constructive criticism. Growth thrives on reflection and learning, but there is a difference between thoughtful consideration and wholesale acceptance of every judgment encountered. Discernment becomes essential, the ability to evaluate input without surrendering self-definition. Your value is multifaceted, often invisible in ways others may never fully grasp. Qualities such as resilience, integrity, compassion, creativity, and perseverance cannot always be measured externally. They do not always produce immediate recognition. Some of the most meaningful attributes operate quietly, shaping lives subtly, influencing outcomes gradually. Lack of acknowledgement does not negate their presence. There is also a temporal dimension to recognition. Value unrecognized today may be appreciated tomorrow. Many contributions, talents, and qualities are understood only in hindsight. Immediate validation is not always an accurate indicator of significance. History, both personal and collective, is filled with examples of worth discovered late, talents recognized after dismissal, voices valued after silence. Internal stability grows when you anchor your sense of worth within yourself. Self-knowledge becomes a compass. You understand your intentions, your efforts, your progress, your principles. Confidence arises not from applause, but from alignment with your values. Criticism becomes information rather than identity. Rejection becomes circumstance rather than condemnation. This perspective also cultivates emotional resilience. When self-worth is internally grounded, external fluctuations lose much of their power. Praise does not inflate excessively. Dismissal does not devastate completely. You remain steady, less vulnerable to the unpredictable tides of opinion. There is quiet dignity in recognizing that not all audiences are capable of seeing you clearly. Some lack the perspective, some the empathy, some the willingness. Their limitations, however, need not become your doubts. Clarity about this distinction preserves confidence and prevents unnecessary self-questioning. Human beings possess an extraordinary capacity for misjudgment. Greatness has been overlooked. Kindness has been dismissed. Potential has been underestimated. Yet none of these errors alter the intrinsic qualities of those misjudged. Reality remains unchanged by perception. Protecting your sense of worth requires conscious mental discipline. Thoughts influenced by rejection or neglect must be examined rather than automatically believed. Self-doubt often masquerades as realism, whispering that invisibility equals inadequacy. But absence of recognition is not evidence of absence of value. It is merely evidence of perception not yet aligned. When you internalize this truth, interactions with the world shift subtly yet powerfully. You no longer chase approval with the same urgency. You no longer interpret every dismissal as deficiency. You no longer feel compelled to contort yourself for acceptance. Confidence becomes quieter, steadier, less dependent on external affirmation. Your worth is not diminished by another's blindness. It is not erased by indifference. It is not altered by misunderstanding. It remains intact, steady, independent of who notices and who does not. And in moments when doubt attempts to intrude, when silence from others feels heavy, when recognition seems absent, there is strength in remembering that value is not created by observation, and truth is not rewritten by perception, and who you are does not fluctuate with the limitations of those who fail to see, who fail to understand, who fail to acknowledge, who fail to recognize, who fail to look beyond their own narrow frames of reference, who fail to perceive the depth that exists beyond surfaces, who fail to grasp the quiet, enduring reality of your presence. Your growth, your substance, your undeniable, unchanging, intrinsic worth that continues to exist regardless of visibility, regardless of approval, regardless of acknowledgement, regardless of the ever-shifting, imperfect, deeply human nature of judgment and perception that surrounds you yet never truly defines you in any final or absolute sense, because definition itself remains something far too vast, far too complex, far too deeply rooted within your own lived experience to be contained by the fleeting, incomplete, and often distorted views held by others who may never fully see you as you truly are, as you continue becoming, as you continue existing beyond the reach of their limited sight and understanding, as you continue. Protecting your energy is not an indulgence reserved for moments of comfort. It is a fundamental responsibility toward your own well-being. Yet many people move through life with the quiet, persistent belief that prioritizing themselves is somehow selfish, that guarding their mental and emotional reserves is an act of disregard for others. This misunderstanding has led countless individuals into cycles of exhaustion, resentment, and silent depletion. Energy, though invisible, is among the most valuable resources you possess. It fuels your thoughts, shapes your reactions, influences your decisions, and sustains your capacity to navigate the world. To protect it is not self-centeredness, but self-respect in its most practical form. Every interaction, every environment, every obligation draws from your internal reserves. Some experiences replenish you, offering clarity, inspiration, and vitality. Others drain you, leaving behind fatigue, irritation, or unease. The distinction is not always dramatic. Often depletion occurs gradually, almost imperceptibly, accumulating through repeated exposure to negativity, conflict, unrealistic demands, or emotional turbulence. Many fail to notice the erosion until weariness becomes a constant companion, until patience shortens, until joy feels distant, until even simple tasks feel burdensome. There exists a cultural admiration for relentless availability, for endless accommodation, for the ability to endure without complaint. People are praised for overextending, for saying yes when they wish to say no, for absorbing pressures without protest. While generosity and kindness are noble qualities, they become unsustainable when divorced from self-preservation. Giving from an empty reserve is not generosity, it is self-neglect. No system, no relationship, no responsibility can thrive on chronic depletion. Protecting your energy requires awareness. You must learn to observe the subtle signals of fatigue, the quiet indicators of emotional strain, the creeping sense of mental overload. These signals are not weaknesses to be suppressed, but messages to be understood. Irritability, persistent tiredness, difficulty concentrating, and a sense of being overwhelmed often reflect not failure but imbalance. The body and mind, remarkably communicative, reveal when limits are being approached or crossed. Boundaries play a central role in energy preservation. Without them, your time, attention, and emotional capacity remain vulnerable to external demands. Boundaries are frequently mischaracterized as barriers of coldness or rejection, yet in truth they are structures of sustainability. They define where your responsibilities end and another's begin. They protect against overcommitment and prevent the quiet resentment that arises when personal limits are ignored. A boundary does not declare hostility, it expresses clarity. Equally vital is the ability to differentiate between obligation and choice. Many energy-draining patterns persist because individuals perceive every request as mandatory, every expectation as binding. The fear of disappointing others often overrides the recognition of personal limits, yet not every demand warrants compliance. Discernment becomes essential. The capacity to evaluate where your energy is best invested and where restraint is necessary. This discernment is not rooted in indifference but in wisdom. Emotional energy is particularly susceptible to erosion. Exposure to chronic negativity, persistent criticism, or manipulative dynamics can be profoundly draining. Such environments subtly distort mood and perspective, creating tension that lingers long after interactions conclude. Protecting your energy in these contexts may require distance, selective engagement, or the deliberate cultivation of detachment. You cannot control the dispositions of others, but you retain authority over your participation. Rest, often undervalued, is a cornerstone of renewal. Modern rhythms frequently glorify productivity at the expense of recovery, encouraging constant activity while neglecting restoration. Yet energy is cyclical, not infinite. Without adequate rest, mental clarity diminishes, emotional resilience weakens, and physical vitality declines. Rest is not merely the absence of activity. It is the intentional restoration of capacity. It enables sustained effectiveness rather than temporary output. The misconception of selfishness often emerges when individuals begin asserting control over their energy. Resistance may arise from those accustomed to unrestricted access to your time and attention. Limits may be questioned, priorities challenged, decisions misunderstood. Yet discomfort from others does not invalidate necessity. Self-honor frequently requires tolerating temporary disapproval in service of long-term balance. Protecting your energy also demands internal discipline. Not all depletion originates externally. Rumination, excessive worry, self-criticism, and unresolved emotional patterns can consume vast reserves. The mind, left unchecked, can become a relentless drain, revisiting past conflicts, anticipating future anxieties, or magnifying perceived shortcomings. Cultivating mental awareness allows interruption of such cycles. Attention, once redirected, restores space for clarity and composure. There is profound strength in recognizing that your energy shapes your experience of reality. A depleted mind interprets challenges more negatively, responds more impulsively, and struggles to access creativity or patience. A replenished mind, by contrast, navigates complexity with greater steadiness, perceives possibilities more readily, and engages with others more constructively. Energy preservation is therefore not merely personal maintenance, but a determinant of perception and performance. Self-honor is expressed through intentional choices that safeguard vitality. It appears in the courage to decline when necessary, in the wisdom to disengage from fruitless conflict, in the discipline to rest without guilt, in the awareness to recognize draining patterns. These actions, though often subtle, reinforce an internal message of worthiness. They affirm that your well-being is neither secondary nor negotiable. Comparison frequently undermines energy protection. Observing others' capacities, schedules, or tolerances can generate unrealistic expectations. Yet energy is deeply individual, influenced by temperament, circumstances, health, and countless unseen factors. What drains one person may invigorate another. What exhausts today may energize tomorrow. Authentic self-awareness resists the pressure of uniform standards. Compassion toward oneself is inseparable from sustainable energy management. Many individuals judge themselves harshly for fatigue, interpreting exhaustion as inadequacy rather than information. This judgment compounds depletion, adding emotional strain to existing weariness. Self-compassion, by contrast, acknowledges limits without condemnation. It allows adjustment without shame. Relationships flourish when energy is preserved rather than depleted. Presence becomes more genuine, patience more accessible, engagement more meaningful. Chronic exhaustion, conversely, breeds irritability, detachment, and diminished empathy. Protecting your energy therefore enhances not only personal well-being but interpersonal quality. There exists a quiet empowerment in reclaiming authority over your internal resources. You cease living reactively, cease surrendering vitality to every external fluctuation. Intentionality replaces compulsion. Choice replaces obligation. Stability replaces chronic strain. This shift does not isolate you from others. It enables more authentic participation. Energy, once recognized as finite and invaluable, commands respect. Decisions acquire greater clarity. Commitments become more deliberate. engagement becomes more conscious. The false dichotomy between self-care and generosity dissolves, revealing that sustainability strengthens contribution rather than diminishing it. Protecting your energy is not withdrawal from responsibility, but refinement of it. It is the understanding that endurance without renewal is unsustainable, that availability without limits is corrosive, that generosity without preservation is self-defeating. It is the recognition that honoring your capacity enables, rather than restricts your ability to move through the world with steadiness, clarity, patience, and presence. That guarding your vitality safeguards your perspective, your emotional equilibrium, your resilience amid difficulty, your ability to respond rather than react, your capacity to engage without resentment, your strength to remain centered within turbulence, your freedom to choose deliberately rather than surrender reflexively, your right to exist without chronic depletion, your permission to value rest without guilt, your authority to define limits without apology, your responsibility to preserve the invisible yet essential force that shapes how you think, how you feel, how you connect, how you endure, how you continue forward through the ever-shifting demands, expectations, and complexities of life that will always seek your attention, yet need not consume your entirety when awareness, discipline, and self-respect guide the quiet, ongoing stewardship of your inner reserves.